It's a really great pleasure to introduce Ofer Cassif, who who will be talking about the current situation in Israel with the most extremist of a right-wing nature. Extreme, I don't like the word extremist actually, but extreme right-wing government in Israel, which he will be talking about, and he's got first-hand knowledge of, obviously, as a member of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. Ofer Cassif is he's going to speak in English, and he can well speak in English because he hopefully the PhD that he wrote in this country when he was a student here will be published as a book, nudge nudge, because it's extremely important. It's a Marxist analysis of nationalism, and that's what we badly need at the moment. Badly need it. So. But apart from being a respected academic, Ofer Cassif is an activist and a revolutionary, a member of the Israeli Communist Party, Maki. He was the political advisor to one of the great leaders of that party, Mayor Vilna. He is now a member of the Knesset for Hadash-Ta'al, which is the progressive linkage of the Israeli left-wing communists with the some of the Arab parties, only some, unfortunately. Ofer Cassif has been opposed to the occupation ever since the first Intifada. He was one of the first refuseniks. He refused to fight in the Israeli army. He's been in prison, 4 times, I think, and could well be find himself in prison again, since the views that he holds and those of people that we respect and who are near to us are not tolerated, or not to be tolerated possibly by this government. So it's a real great pleasure to introduce you, Ofer, and please speak.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be in England, in London, and specifically here in the Marx Memorial Library, and to meet some friends that I haven't seen for so many years, like David, my dear friend, that last time we met, I think it was about 10 years ago, and Salam Ali that we met lately in Portugal. We just discovered it was something like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I guess. And to know a few new friends. I made a very dear new friend, Yitzhak Cohen, who's here. I'm very grateful for he and his family hospitality, and I stay with them. So I'm really very well appreciated. Thank you so very much. And all of you, of course. I don't know, for those who don't follow my Facebook or Twitter, because sometimes I do publish in English as well, normally only in Arabic and Hebrew, but sometimes in English, especially if I see that something is very important internationally. So I try to also to write in English. So for those who do not follow or don't follow me, it's not that I expect anyone to follow me. It's not that interesting, hardly my wife does. So, but anyway, so I'm well known for my big mouth, especially in the Israeli society at large and in the Knesset as well. I just discovered yesterday, by the way, that the ethics committee of the Knesset is supposed to charge me for calling another member of the Knesset disgusting Nazi. So, and it's forbidden to use the term in the Israeli parliament. So you cannot call Nazis Nazis in Israel, you see. And so I'm saying that because I am going to use my big mouth here, and I hope that nobody is going to be insulted. And if someone does, so it's his or her problem. Anyway, I just began with this introduction because and you discover in less than a second what I meant, why I did find it suitable to introduce it in such a way, is because the current government of Israel is for the first time a full-fledged fascist government with neo-Nazi components. Full stop. That's the beginning of my speech. Because it's important for me that people will be aware of that. It's very common to refer, for instance, to the new government as a fascist or neo-fascist government. It's common to call Viktor Orban fascist. And of course it's true. Or even Modi in India, or Bolsonaro, that luckily is not a president anymore. And unfortunately, there's a wave of fascism across the globe, so I won't refer to each and every prime minister or president in the world now, and unfortunately there are too many fascists. And it's even acceptable to refer, for instance, to the Golden Dawn in Greece as neo-Nazis, or to the new powered party in Sweden as neo-Nazi. But in Israel, you cannot, it's very unacceptable to call someone a fascist, let alone a neo-Nazi. And everybody can assume why. Because of the history, because of the immediate intuition that comes to the fore once you refer to someone as a Nazi or a neo-Nazi. But I want to emphasize, and I hope that that goes to the Israeli medias. Normally it does, and I'm happy about it. Because people must understand the danger that is in front of us. The Israeli government is a full-fledged fascist government with neo-Nazi components. That perhaps you heard of, like Ben Gvir, Smotrich, and even some members from the Likud party, Netanyahu's party, hold neo-Nazi perceptions and beliefs. And the truth should be said. We cannot sugarcoat the truth. We should use the right terms. Now, I want to explain what's ahead of us. Why I refer to those thugs in such names or descriptions, to be more precise. First of all, I want to share with you what just came to my knowledge today or yesterday in the last 24 hours by, reading newspapers and getting some messages from colleagues and from my staff at the Knesset. Let's begin with one thing that happened today. Today there was Jewish, you call them extremists, I will call them fascists or Nazis, whatever, and a demonstration in the occupied East Jerusalem, just in front of Bab el Amud, which is in the old city, an entrance, a gate, one of the gates to enter the old city, the occupied old city. There was a demonstration by some Jewish thugs. One of them is a senior representative in the Jerusalem municipality. And in their demonstration, that by the way was allowed by the occupying police forces, by preventing Palestinians from getting there. This is a Palestinian area, you should understand. They were prevented from entering their own lands and places in order to allow those thugs to demonstrate. And what did they say in this demonstration? It was sent to me by video just 5 hours ago, something like that. They shouted, "We want Nakba now." This is the bon ton in Israel now. Thought in Israel now. Obviously, neither of them was arrested. Were allowed. By the way, if an Arab, a Palestinian, would shout something similar to that, if he would have been lucky, he would be arrested. And you know what would happen if he wasn't lucky. But Jews allowed to shout whatever they like. And of course, Nakba now means extermination, deportation, destruction. By the way, as someone, allow me to say, as someone that used to teach in the past at the university logics, they also would fail the course. Because those who say we want a second Nakba, at the same time they say that there wasn't the first one. So, but that's just something I remember throughout the discussion. But this is only one example. Let's take other examples. What's going on now at the Knesset itself? And then I go back to what's going on to so-called in the streets among the public. But at the Knesset itself, first and foremost, let's remember that out of 120 members of the Knesset, we are only 5. We are the only ones, plus only 1 from the Labour Party, which is an exceptional. So altogether, our fraction of the Knesset, 5 seats, plus 1 from the Labour, we are the only 6 who actually use the term occupation and apartheid. Nobody even refers to it. In the past, some people said occupation, but we want it. Now it's not even allowed to use the term occupation. Sooner or later, I'm sure it's going to be delegalized. Let alone apartheid or ethnic cleansing. And those exist in the Palestinian occupied territories and within the 48 borders within the state of Israel proper as well. There is a system of apartheid according to the common definition of the United Nations and the Roma Convention for those who know it. Israel answers or fits the definitions of the Roma Convention and the United Nations to apartheid. In so many areas in the occupied Palestinian territories, there is ethnic cleansing. In the South Hills of Hebron, of El Khalil, there is an area called Mesafer Yatta. More than 1,000 Palestinians live there. So many years. And it was declared just lately, the Supreme Court, which for one reason or another has the image of a liberal one, which is nonsense, they decided that it is legal to deport those people from their lands in order to allow the Israeli occupying military to pursue some exercises there. By the way, they don't. It's just an excuse for the ethnic cleansing there. In East Jerusalem, there's an ethnic cleansing by assaulting and molesting the Palestinians to the degree they would leave because they cannot tolerate it anymore. Cleansing too, by the way, by the definition, again, by the United Nations and the international law, by them, the definition of ethnic cleansing is not just pointing a gun at someone in order to deport him or her, but also to make the life of someone so miserable that one has to flee. That's also ethnic cleansing. Israel has been pursuing ethnic cleansing for ages, but it became more and more severe in the last few years, and nowadays even more so. So, but it's not only the occupation and the apartheid and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. And that's one of the main differences between the current government and the former ones. Because we know that the occupation, the regime, the military rule over the Palestinians in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the siege, the malicious, deadly, sadistic siege over Gaza Strip, those exist for many years, you know. It's not new. Something else has changed, and I give you a few examples. The first law that the new government passed just lately, 2 weeks ago, something like that, transforms the power over the police from the chief of the police, who supposedly is a professional and not political figure, to the minister, the national security minister, who is Ben-Gvir. And Ben-Gvir is one of, in my view, is the only second to Smotrich, if you know the name, in being a neo-Nazi thug. By the way, this Ben-Gvir, who always, incites against us, myself and my friends, as supporter of terrorists, as Jewish hatreds, as Jewish haters, as the enemies, fifth column, whatever, and terrorists, is the only member of the Knesset that was actually convicted in supporting terrorism, Jewish terrorism. He was convicted. He was convicted by the courts in assaulting police officer. He was leading for many years, he lives as a settler in El Khalil, as a pain in the neck of the Palestinians. And continuously he was leading assaults on Palestinians in Al Shuhada Street, in the market of El Khalil and other places. He is now the Minister of National Security, and he's got, and this coming week, it's going to be even strengthened. He's got the power over the police to the extent that he can decide, note, he can decide even what is going to be investigated and what not. He's going to have the power to decide, for instance, who's entitled to demonstrate and who's not. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. So that's one of the first laws that the government actually enacted. And you know, this the system, the political system in Israel resembles to a great extent the one in England, because it is a parliamentary system. So the government actually controls the legislator. You know, there's no real separation of powers as far as the legislator and the executive are concerned. So the government in Israel, it's a coalition system. In England, it's used to be quite exceptional, although in the last two elections, I think it was also a coalition here. But in Israel, it's always been like this, a coalition that has the majority seats in the Knesset itself, so they can actually do whatever they can. The only bulwark against the government, the only checks and balances that could prevent the government throughout the years from doing whatever the government likes were, you know, some formal checks and balances and informal. What do I mean by that? Formal is basically the state comptroller, for instance, or state attorney, and mainly the judicial system. There's a lot of criticism because as I just indicated, the judicial system has always supported the occupation. Never, you know, dictated something against the military or the secret police, whatever. But still, in some other respects, it was used, let's say in that way, to stop the government from carrying out some crimes against the Palestinians and against the progressive powers within Israel, the progressive factors, let's say, within Israel, Jews and Palestinians and others. And I will refer to that because that's the next target. The independent judicial system is going to be eliminated in the next few weeks. That's the next endeavor of Netanyahu's government. To abolish the judicial system, I shall explain in a second how come. Also, there are informal, you know, checks and balances or limits. Free press, it's under attack as well. There's no real free press in Israel now. Not because the law doesn't allow freedom of press, but because the incitement and the violent against the media, especially against those who criticize Netanyahu in particular and the government in general, are on the rise all the time. Nowadays in Israel, journalists are afraid to open their mouth. So it's not only the legal hindrances or limitations, it's also the kind of discourse that this fascist government allows or encourages. So many journalists, as a generic term, journalists in the television or the radio or the printed newspapers or even the social network. Many of them are afraid to open their mouth because they are afraid they are going to be physically attacked. There are some examples of journalists who allowed themselves and insisted in talking against the government and against especially the occupation and racism, like you probably know Gideon Levy is a prominent one. He needed to be accompanied by a bodyguard. And some simply decided not to take the risk. This is a fascist culture, not just a fascist formal system. Same about, and by the way, some other journalists were actually put in their position by Netanyahu and his companions. So there is a combination of dedicated or loyal journalists, loyal to Netanyahu in person or at least to the coalition. There's a combination between those and other journalists who are afraid, and I do not put the blame on them. I can understand that. If one is under a continuous threat, I cannot blame him for being afraid. He's not the guilty one. The thugs are the guilty ones. And again, this is only just, as I said before, the tip of the iceberg now. So there's no real free press in Israel now. Again, not because the law doesn't allow it, although we are approaching a change in the law as well. The new minister appointed, surprisingly, by Netanyahu to be in charge of the media he already declared that he's going to shut down the public channel. The public channel is the leading one in criticizing the government or the common or the public discourse or whatever. Not enough in my view, but at least relatively in comparison to other channels, it does. So now they're going to shut it down. There's another change that we just began to see in the education system. There are two ministers now that are in charge of the education. There is the education minister, and there's another minister that is going to be, is already not going to be, is in charge of the so-called external projects. That means projects that are adopted by the education system, but they are carried out by factors who are not organically part of the education system, which is part of privatization as well, of course. So they already declared, both ministers, about the radical changes they are going to insert into education system. For instance, they are going to abolish the project against racism. There is a project, by the way, not a very progressive one, a very problematic one, but at least there is a sense of mentioning something against racism. They're going to eliminate it from the curriculum. There's no going, after many years, there's not going to be a project against racism at schools. Another thing is disallow, and they already mentioned that, they disallow to external factors that support human rights to enter and lecture at schools. For instance, B'Tselem, you know B'Tselem. B'Tselem and other human rights organizations, especially those who struggle for the rights of the Palestinians and for others like women, LGBT, they are going to be disallowed to enter schools. There's one thing they're going to strengthen, religious studies. Religious studies following the perspective, a very specific perspective, which adopts Jewish supremacism. Those are changes that the new government already began to carry out. And now I want to say some things about, say a few words about the judicial system, because that's probably the most important and very topical thing. Change few things in that, as I mentioned before, practically that is going to eliminate totally the independence of the judicial system, not to say the judicial system as such. The first thing they're going to change is the committee that nominates judges. Since 1953, there's a committee consists of 7 persons, which is more or less balanced between the executive, the attorney's chamber, the Supreme Court, and the parliament, the legislator. There is a kind of a balance between all those authorities in nominating or electing judges. Now, and this week, it's going to be at the beginning of the discussion in enacting the process of passing this law. This bill begins in 2 days' time. They're going to change the committee, so the government is going to control the committee. The government. They're going to change it from 7 persons committee to 11, out of which 7 are going to be from the coalition or the government and supporters of the government. That means, before I even continue, and there's more, before I even continue, enough to understand that that's the final cut or the final nail in the coffin of the separation of authorities or powers in Israel. Because as I mentioned before, the government already controls the Knesset, already controls the parliament. The government already eliminated the free press, the education system, etc. And I said what I said about the police. Of course, there are many other things. I will mention another one in a second. But end of the judicial system. So it means that eventually, in a few weeks' time, or few months at most, there's going to be even just one power in Israel, the executive, the government. No judicial, no real independent legislator, and no judicial. Because the judges who are going to be elected are going to be the ones who are totally loyal to the government. Now that's the first test of the judges elected. That they are going to be elected by, I said, the majority of this committee consists of the supporters and members of the coalition and the government, but that's only the first test. After those judges are elected, there's going to be a hearing at the Constitution Committee of the Knesset, and guess who controls the Constitution Committee of the Knesset, which I'm a member of, by the way? The government has the majority in the Constitution Committee. So it means that after the first test, which already gives huge power to the government over and above the legislator and of course the independent judicial, the hearing is going to even give it more power. Because after the first test, the second test is going, to select those who are better for the government and the prime minister. Now, after that, the judicial system, not only the Supreme Court, all courts in Israel, throughout the hierarchy, is going to be in the hands of the government, of the prime minister personally, and the justice minister, who is not only disciple, but is the almost the twin brother of Netanyahu, of the prime minister. He follows what the prime minister wants. They act together. And on top of that, there are another 2 changes in the judicial system. They are going to eliminate, for instance, the possibility of the High Court to sell legally laws that were accepted by the Knesset under the explanation that they are anti-constitutional. There's no constitution in Israel, which is another problem, by the way, but there are so-called basic laws, very weak ones, but they apparently have the status of a material constitution as opposed to formal constitution. So since 1992, the first time that two basic laws that deal with human rights were accepted, ever since in the exactly 31 years ago, the court could cancel laws that were enacted by the parliament if the judges realize that those laws contradict those basic laws, especially as far as human rights are concerned. That's going to be over because the law explicitly says judges cannot overrule laws enacted by the Knesset, but only if all judges that sit together accept unanimously that the law should be overruled. The chances are very slim. So, and there are some others. I wouldn't like to exhaust you because it's too specified and we need much more time, but that's probably the most dangerous and important thing that is going to happen very soon. Israel is moving now towards a full-fledged fascist dictatorship, and the international community, whatever that means, following our chat before, must do something. We continue our struggle. We never give up. Our church said we shall never surrender. Yeah, but and we shall never surrender. It's not enough if we do not. And remember my words seriously. I don't want to sound dramatic, or actually I do. But remember, if the international community, the governments around the world don't do something to stop this fascist, crazy, racist government, this fascist accompanied by neo-Nazi government, it's going to end up in huge bloodshed that even Enoch Powell didn't predict when he was talking about rivers of blood. Because now, if you want me to borrow names from the history of Britain, Israel is controlled by a combination of Enoch Powell and Oswald Mosley. That's Israel today, as far as the government is concerned. And of course, the first victim are the Palestinians in the occupied territories, but within the sovereign state of Israel too. And the writing is on the wall, written by blood, not by ink. And it's going to be written with much more blood, especially Palestinian blood, if we don't stop them. And I want the world to understand that. And I try to spread the word wherever I can. I said exactly the same when I was interviewed by CNN and Al Jazeera, or any other channel or newspaper around the globe. Because Israel must be saved from itself. Of course, on top of saving the Palestinians, who are the continuous victims for ages. And I'm warning here, everybody who listens or watches us. I'm warning. I'm not a prophet. I'm not trying to be. It's just understanding, political developments and evolutions. We are on a brink of a huge disaster. The first ones to pay the price are going to be the Palestinians, as I said before. They are going to be butchered if we don't stop the government. They are going to be butchered. In the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza Strip, and within Israel. I don't know if you remember what happened in May 2021, that once Israel attacked Gaza, following, by the way, who ignited the fire? The same Ben-Gvir that now is the national security minister. He ignited the fire by penetrating to Al-Aqsa and to occupied old city in East Jerusalem. And Israel, once they attacked Gaza, there was a fire within some cities within Israel, cities in which Palestinians and Jews live side by side. Unfortunately, I cannot say really together. I wish it was together. But there's no togetherness under hierarchy. So I would say side by side. And Palestinians were attacked viciously by some neo-Nazi thugs. People were hurt, people were killed, Jews and Palestinians. Only, I'm afraid, that's going to be only the beginning. And Israel wants that. I mean, the government of Israel wants that because they will use it as an excuse to follow what I begin with, another Nakba. They want that. They said the writing is on the wall by blood, not by ink. But it's not only the Palestinians. The next ones who are going to pay the price are the democratic Jews within Israel, like myself. We are already targeted. There are attempts to kick us out of the Knesset, by the way. For instance, let's begin with that. I personally am going to be charged probably, although it's not sure yet, but there's a great chance that I'm going to be charged or prosecuted because as it were, I attacked a policeman, which is a hogwash. But it's not me, it's not a personal issue. There's going to be, after Palestinians, you probably remember the very famous poem by Martin Niemöller in Germany, who said in the beginning they took the communists that didn't raise my voice, so therefore they took the trade unionists, etc., etc. Eventually, when they came to take me, nobody was left to raise one's voice. That's exactly what's going to happen. The Palestinians are going to be taken first. Nobody or hardly anybody is going to raise one's voice because they are Palestinians and nobody cares about them. Internationally as well. But communists will be taken. The trade unionists, hardly. There are hardly any trade unionists in Israel, by the way. So probably that's not the best example. The liberals are going to be taken, okay? Or those who oppose the occupation, even though they are not socialists, there are some. They are to be taken. Women are already, there are already some laws that are going to encourage gender segregation in Israel. I didn't mention it before because there are so many things. And by the way, there's a blitz of laws. It's in a very short time. It doesn't even take time. They already plan to, some of them, in the government, there are those, among those neo-Nazi thugs, there are many fundamentalists as well. The same minister I mentioned before that is in charge of the external projects in the education system, he explicitly says, time after time, that the role of women is to stay at home in the kitchen, bringing children. He's the minister in charge of the projects in the education system. He does. It's difficult to believe where we find ourselves. We are not on the brink of the abyss. We are deep in the abyss already. And there are so many things, to add. Another law, by the way, that I forgot to mention is that they are going now to revoke a law that bars racist blocs in parliament. So those things, we are in a very dangerous situation. And by the way, I began to say, so if the first they take the Palestinians and afterwards the progressive or liberal or whatever, anti-racial, racist, anti-occupation Jews, that volcano is going to erupt. Because obviously, first of all, Palestinian organizations are not going to be silent for a long time. They cannot be silent for a long time. They cannot allow their people to be persecuted, oppressed, humiliated. Anything. It will end one day. And then everything is going to explode. And it will lead to big fire in the region. That makes the Ukrainian-Russia issue perhaps even relatively small one. Because we know the region. We know what's going on in the Middle East. We know the dangers. And that, by the way, one of the consequences is that it's going to, that's the reason to use Iran. The United States, Israel, and some others like Saudi Arabia, the so-called reactionary regimes, they use Iran as a scapegoat, by the way. It's not because I'm a supporter of Iran's regime, or of course not, far from that. But they want to use Iran as a scapegoat in order to unite them, find a common parlance, common denominator. That's another danger. So eventually the whole world is going to pay the price. So it's not only a matter, of course, first and foremost, it's a matter of justice, of of justice or liberation, of equality, whatever, but it's also a matter of the world interests. So I would finish by, I think that my 30 minutes are already passed, so, no?
Yeah, just about.
Yeah. How much was the time? How much did they listen? All right. Perhaps I'll finish in 5 minutes, okay? Give me 5 minutes more. Where have I been talking? So those who say that when you enjoy, so the time flies, all right. Anyway, so it has nothing to do with the content, just with the company. To be precise. Anyway, so what I wanted to say before I begin to conclude is that the danger is very grave. Two things that I must say before I finish. First, this government still is different from the former ones. Not although all of the governments, all Israeli governments supported the Jewish supremacism one way or another. The occupation has been there most of the years. You know, Israel exists for 75 years. The occupation is 55 years. You make the calculation. Is the occupation, as Hague probably going to declare sooner or later, the occupation is not a temporary issue. It is inherent to the Israeli political and social lives. So what's different? The difference, as already stems from what I said, is that it's not only that the persecution and the death toll and the torching and everything of the Palestinians is going to be worse. That's for sure. But there's one difference, which is not only a quantitative change, but a qualitative change or essential change, is that thus far, at least those who are privileged, that means Jews within Israel, especially Occidental Jews, we are, I must say, but we use, some of us, not enough, we use our privilege to protest and struggle against those injustices. So, not 100%, but we could use our privilege to protest and struggle against the occupation, against racism, against, by the way, class exploitation, I didn't mention it, or gender exploitation. Now that is going to be over too, because once there's no free judiciary, once human rights, I didn't mention that, human rights organizations are targeted as well. But I mentioned B'Tselem as far in regard to the school and education system. But then some other laws that are going to be enacted are going to limit the very possibility of human rights organization to act as a whole, in general, not only to enter schools, but in general. So once those are limited, even the privileged, so-called, won't be able to join forces with the victims in struggling for peace, justice, and liberation. That's a huge difference. So, but still, and that would be the last sentence. It's going to be a long sentence, but the last one. Still believe that we can eventually win by three things. First of all, that I mentioned before, by not giving up, and we won't give up, I assure you. Not myself, not my comrades. We never continue our struggle. We continue struggle with our comrades, brothers and sisters, Palestinians, brothers and sisters. Another thing that I mentioned, we do need the international intervention. That may be a product of a pressure from so-called from above, from the peoples. I don't trust any leader in the world that would do anything to stop that madness. But if there is a pressure from the peoples, the governments won't be able to refrain from acting. That's the second thing. And okay, that would suffice, I believe. Thank you. I'm sorry if I talk too much.
Yes, I think the audience didn't mind too much. So
Thanks.
thank you very much indeed. Well, we've now got time for questions. If you're online, please, if you want to ask a question, put it in the chat. To sign, well, if you want to, you have to use this, by the way, if you want to ask a question, and Tom over there will pass this round, because the people who are not with us will only be able to hear your question if you that. So first of all, we'll start.
I'd be happy if you mention your names, so it would be more.
Okay, my name is Maria Warren. This might not be very relevant, but what's the position of Mordecai Vanunu in all this?
What his position or what my position towards him?
His position, how will he survive this?
Okay, I write it down so I won't forget.
Any other questions? Yes.
Steve Johnson. I just wondered if you could say something about, there have been recent protests in Israel against government, and I just wondered if you could say something about the nature of those protests and the forces involved, because I sort of get the impression that it's a bit like anti-Trump demonstrators in the United States. A lot of them objected to his most outrageous right-wing policies, for instance, but didn't necessarily oppose US foreign policy per se. And I get that sense that, you know, that's the case with these demonstrations. A lot of them are not really questioning the occupation as such, but probably worried that this government may undermine the sort of liberal image they like to portray Israel as being. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Let's take three.
Yes,
Okay?
yes, it's wonderful.
David McKnight.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
David McKnight. It relates to the previous question, and you alluded to it in terms of the size and significance of the trade union movement in Israel. To what extent is the trade union movement in Israel supportive of the opposition to the government?
First of all, about Vanunu, actually, I don't know where I know that he's in Israel because he's not allowed to leave, but he's not involved at all. I have no connection to him, and I don't know. I can assume what he thinks, but not more than that. So unfortunately, I cannot really answer your question in regard to his position. I have no idea. He's not allowed even to speak, by the way. He's still persecuted after he's, was so many years, spent so many years in isolation at prison, whatever, all those terrible things that he went through, and still he's not really free. So that even prevents me from saying what he thinks. I cannot know. As to the protest, first of all, the protest is very important. I presume that tomorrow they are going to be, unfortunately, I won't be there because I'm here. But I presume that tomorrow we're going to see about, perhaps I'm wrong, but I guess there are going to be about 200,000 people tomorrow in the streets. Because everybody is afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of losing their privileges. The protest, basically, of course, we are part of it, but we are the only ones who have signs. By the way, last demonstration, we came with Palestinian flags, because one of the things that Ben Gvir dictated to the police 2 weeks ago is to disallow raising the Palestinian flags. But the police told him, and the state attorney told him, that he cannot do that because the law allows that. So we had 100 Palestinian flags with us in the demonstration, alongside red flags, signs against the occupation. The most important one is there's no democracy with occupation, because those who are demonstrating for democracy, they forget, quote unquote, forget that as long as there is an occupation, there's no democracy, even if the judicial system is totally independent, etc., etc. So you can understand from that the vast majority of the demonstrators are afraid to lose their privileges, their civil rights, their freedom of speech, the freedom of movement, the freedom of association, the freedom of demonstration. It was published yesterday that another law that is going to be discussed soon in the parliament is to forbid demonstrations, that 100 people and more will need a special permission to demonstrate. That's another thing that is coming up soon, So, but they don't care, most of them, about the fact that all those things that they're afraid of already exist, in the occupied territories. And our role is to be there and to force them to understand that. And we do. That's the reason we are there, not because it's hard for us emotionally. For me personally, it was not easy to go to demonstration last week, when everything is with Israeli flags, which for me symbolize, apartheid and ethnic cleansing and occupation. It wasn't easy, but we must be there. We must be there because we must force them to think about it, and that's what we do. And I am optimistic about it. Optimistic to the extent that some people, even if it takes some time, those people who demonstrate not against the occupation but see us there, something is, penetrating into their minds, even if they do not admit that to themselves. But I believe that the fruits are going to be what do you say, where the fruit is?
Right.
Sorry?
Right.
Seeds.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was looking for, sorry. The seeds were planted, and I believe that sooner or later, they're going to bear fruits, that's the word that I lost, okay? So that's as far as the protest goes on, but still, it's okay. You're allowed. My pleasure, thank you. Still, there's a risk that the police will begin acting violently. That's what the minister tries to do. on a daily basis, it tries to instruct the police to be more harsh with the demonstrators. And I'm afraid that if violence prevails, that may harm the demonstrations, because unfortunately in Israel, those demonstrators, I don't think that the majority of them will take the risk. Some of them will, but not like at the moment. So, but I hope that won't happen, and that demonstrations will continue and bear fruits. All right, we'll be there to force them to think and understand that there's no democracy with occupation, that there's no real judicial justice system with apartheid, that there's no future for any of us, for neither of the peoples, as long as ethnic cleansing goes on. All right. As to the trade unions, unfortunately, in Israel, there's no real trade union. You know, it sounds very perhaps strange, but the Histadrut, if you know the term, the Histadrut, which is supposedly the biggest trade union, is very, very reactionary. It is Zionist by definition. It is loyal to the Zionist agenda, and it normally collaborates, here I can use the term collaboration, by the way, with the employers. So I don't think that anything good is going to emerge from the Histadrut. There are another relatively new trade unions, Ma'an and Power to the Workers. They are more progressive, but very, very small. They are powerless. So as far as trade unions are concerned, those are not the factors that are going to do the change. They are not game changers, unfortunately.
So, Liz Payne asks, how can the peace movement in Britain respond? And we'll now take a question also from Salam Ali over there.
Peace movements?
How can the peace movement in Britain respond?
Sorry. Shall I come here, maybe? Okay. Can I speak?
Yeah.
Hi. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Comrade Ofer for the excellent contribution. It has provided insight into the inner dynamics, so to speak, of the Israeli society and politics, and especially of the new fascist government led by Netanyahu. 2 points. First, about the killings, I mean, the bloodbath or the massacres against the Palestinians. I mean, according to the facts and figures, last year alone, 224 Palestinians were killed. Yeah, this is in a population of no more than 3 million in the West Bank. And I think to put that in perspective, if you compare that with the population of Britain, this would amount to killing 4,000 people in 1 year. Yeah, and only since the beginning of this year, 12 Palestinians were killed, including 3 children. Yeah, so that's last year before the Netanyahu government was actually established. So, I mean, what you've said, we expect a bloodbath in this year. My question is it possible for both the progressive Israelis and the Palestinians, as well in the occupied territories and also inside Israel itself, can they launch an initiative, a campaign from inside Israel and also the occupied territories towards the international public opinion and international community demanding an end to the massacres. I think this would put enormous pressure on this fascist government of Netanyahu. Second point is, you mentioned the international community. There was a very important step taken by the UN General Assembly last month, demanding that, or as a resolution asking the International Court of Justice to give an opinion on the legality of the Israeli occupation. And in response to that, the Israeli government took punitive or imposed punitive measures against Israel, financial, and on the Palestinian Authority, financial. And in reaction to that, only last Monday, 40 states in the United Nations signed a statement, demanding that Israel should abolish, these punitive measures. So
90.
40. I had the figure 40. 90. Well, that's very important, and I think this is really very important to build on, and therefore, while you are here in London as well, I think it's important for Liberation and the other comrades, if possible, to ensure that you also speak to at least to the mainstream media here, because the BBC has been shamefully silent on what has been going on in the occupied territories.
If you have any connections, be my guest. I'll be there.
Maybe we will. I think we should work on that, really. I think we should knock on doors and use our members of parliament as well, I think, to do that. Thank you.
So now, another question?
No.
Thank you very much for your opening, and it was great. You have already referred to the Abraham Accord and the consequent developments in the Middle East. 2 points that I would like you to elaborate a little bit more. You see the new government in Israel will deal with the Iranian regime. Second point related to this is that, as again you indicated, the Abraham Accord in effect started a realignment of governments and forces in the Middle East, especially, in order to create a new order, their new balance of forces. How do you see new grouping being formed in the region involving Turkey, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, and others? How do you see the role of China, the role that China playing in this region? Thank you very much.
Little question.
Yeah, that's a very simple one and short one. Yeah, that's okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your questions. First of all, as far as the peace movement in England, I think that the peace movement, not only in Britain or in England, but across the world, must step forward and just raise its voice. I'm afraid that I cannot hear them enough. I do follow at least some of those movements around the globe. Some of them, I haven't heard anything from them. Some of them are too, quiet, even if not totally silent. And of course, there are many reasons. First of all, I must tell you something which is, perhaps one of the things that in Israel, when I said those things, people cannot tolerate it. But I must say that it's time, or I begin in another way. Shall never forget or forgive the Holocaust. Repeat, we shall never forget and forgive the Holocaust. But the fact that Jews were the main, of course not the only ones, but the main victims of the Holocaust, of the Nazis, doesn't allow them to repeat history. And it's time for the world to understand that by refraining from criticizing Israel and taking real steps against its crimes, they do not respect the memory of the Holocaust, so the Holocaust victims and survivors, but exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. It's a shame on the memory of the Holocaust victims, including my family. My family was all my grandparents' families from both sides, especially from my mother's side. Neither of them survived. Neither of them. But every day, I told you that yesterday to Yitzhak, every day, metaphorically and empirically, every day when I wake up, I say to myself, and perhaps that's one of the motives in my political lives, that if more people opened their mouth and did something, perhaps it would have not happened, or at least not to that extent. And that's one of the legacies for me. And if that's the legacy, so the conclusion must be not to forgive those who makes those crimes, commits those crimes, but exactly the opposite, to stand against those crimes. That's the legacy of the Holocaust. That's the conclusion we must pursue. That's the moral. And I know that some good people, really, I'm not cynical. Some good people in the peace movement around the world think that they cannot speak up, let alone do something against the state of Israel, because that would put a shame or something like that, or harm memory of the Holocaust. No, I say the opposite. Come on, step forward, speak up, stop the crimes. That's the real legacy. That would be the real respect for the victims of the Holocaust. So that's as far as the peace movements are concerned. Another two questions, including the short one of David. How much time do I have?
Very little.
Okay, so I try to be as brief as possible. I think that the Palestinian campaign already began, but there are two problems with the Palestinian campaign against the massacre that Salam, you mentioned, that goes on. And I'm afraid it's going to be worse, as I mentioned before. There are two problems. First of all, that the campaign is not strong enough. For one reason or another, I don't know. It's not strong enough. And secondly, and that's the worst, it doesn't matter what the Palestinians do. It will always be accused by Israel and its companions as terrorism. That it's not something I imagine or inventing. If the Palestinians act violently, so there is a military terrorism, so to speak. If they support the BDS, so there's diplomatic terrorism. If they appeal to the Hague or the United Nations, so there is a diplomatic terrorism. BDS is an economic terrorism, yes? So doesn't matter what the Palestinians do, it's always terrorism. So it is time for us, everywhere, I mean, to again move forward and say, no, that's not terrorism. Terrorism is the occupation. That's terrorism. Everything that is against terrorism is against the occupation, is anti-terrorism. I think I don't have the right or the intention to tell the Palestinians what to do. Absolutely not. But my view is that they must address this thing. They must be stronger in their international appeal and explain time and time again that accusing them in terrorism, diplomatic terrorism, economic terrorism, what was else, legal terrorism, whatever, that must stop. I think that thus far, they don't do that enough, in my view. And the last question, which I am afraid I won't address in full. First of all, I think the Abraham Accords are, to be very, very, in understatement, to be very, very mild and modest. Shame on those countries. Shame on those countries that neglected the Palestinians only for their own economic and dictator interests. Why dictator the interests? Because the main reason they accepted those accords, signed them, and cooperate or collaborate with Israel is because they get from Israel what they want to pursue their dictatorships: surveillance, equipment, arms, etc. And some say opening the back door to the Pentagon and the White House. So we were the only list in the Knesset that voted against the accords. And we explained, those who vote for the accords are not for peace. We are for peace. Those who vote for the accords are against peace, because that is going to prevent the liberation of the Palestinians and, by definition, real just peace. That's our view in regard to the Abraham Accords, and that answers your question in regard to the new political order. That's the way we were talking about it before. That's the neo-imperialism of the United States. They now, as opposed to what they used to do during the 70s and 80s in Latin America, for instance, or in Vietnam, Korea, etc., now the neo-imperialism is predominantly based on proxies, but it's even to some extent more dangerous than the classic imperialism, because they want to establish a new order under domination or hegemony of the United States. We must oppose it, of course. And last thing, the Iranian issue. As I said before, Iran is used, or if you like, abused by Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United States as a scapegoat to justify their own deeds. And again, it's very important for me to emphasize, I am against the regime in Iran. It's an oppressive regime. It is anti-democratic, it's anti-socialist for sure. I have all the bad things to say about the regime, but that doesn't justify the violence and the threats that Israel and the United States and others spread time and time again against Iran. And that's another aspect of the dangers we are facing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wait. What time? Hang on. Did we say? What did you say that we? What time did you say we have to?
Well, we gave about an hour and a half.
Well, look, there are obviously more questions, and I really want to tire man out, badly. So, do people want to carry on for a quarter of an hour more, or shall we finish now? We finished. I don't know. People online, you could. I know there are. No, there's somebody else put their hand
I do
up as
whatever
well.
you
No, it's up
vote
to.
for.
Yes. So, I wasn't.
That's the problem with
Okay,
being
yes,
the
I
boss,
know. I'll be democratic. So there's a question online. Why have the oppressed become the oppressors? What are the factors that have made Israelis embrace fascism? And clarify.
Position of the two-state solution.
Did you hear that?
I think that would
and
be
I'm
the
going to
15 minutes left.
I'm just going to misuse my position and say, what do you understand by fascism? Is it any government we don't like? Is it? And that's a big question for me. I'm very reluctant to use the term fascist, even to describe Poland, even to describe Hungary and Turkey, even to describe Iran.
Okay, so I begin with the last question, your question. I was lucky enough to teach at the university a course about the ideology and history of fascism. So at least as far as I am concerned personally, I'm very, very, careful in using the term.
So am I.
And I'm using the term with full responsibility as one, forgive me for saying that, as one who actually wrote about it in my PhD as well, but even more so, was teaching about it. So if you like a lecture about the history and ideology of fascism, we have another 1 hour perhaps, so I will.
Too,
But anyway, to be very, very, brief, I agree that I try not to use the term as just as a saying, just in order as a sort of a curse word. That wouldn't be, clever. So when I say that this is a full-fledged fascism, and I said even about neo-Nazi components, I'm very careful, and I refer very carefully to the ingredients, as it were, that the government actually absorbs and carries out. It may be militarism, the glorification of war, for instance, but first and foremost, the most important thing in the classic fascism, so-called, Mussolini and I don't know if you are familiar with Sorel and some others that were before, as well as the current government, is a rejection and hostility to the value of human beings and glorification as the supreme value of the nation. And at the same time, seeing the nation as a living organism, not as something that consists of human beings with rights, interests, liberties, etc., but an organic whole to which each and every individual must be loyal, dedicated, and even sacrifice oneself. That's the fascism, seeing the nation as a living organism and as a supreme value, which supersedes the value of human beings. And all the other stems from that. Unfortunately, that's exactly what the government of Israel is. But the question that was asked before, sorry?
Tuesday.
Okay. Look, our stance in the Communist Party of Israel and Hadash, the Democratic Front for Peace and Equality, which consists mainly of the Communist Party, our view since 1945, more or less, is a support for the two-state solution. Now, I want to explain why. But first of all, I want to emphasize something which is perhaps not very well known. We have no ideological opposition to one state. We have pragmatical opposition to the one-state solution first, basically because it's not a real solution. Why? Because you cannot, as if it was a magic, after more than 100 years of oppression and the hostility that came out of that, you cannot solve it in 1 second by establishing a common state. That would be a disaster for everybody. Everybody will pay the price. So this is one thing. The other thing is that the Palestinians deserve their own national self-determination. There cannot be a real, let alone just solution if the Palestinians do not enjoy their own national self-determination. One state would not allow that. One state under the circumstances will be, by definition, an apartheid state, even more than the current situation. So those are the main explanations why the two-state solution is the right one. But I have to tell you a story that I told you before. In the last decade or so, I had a lot of meetings with the General Secretary of the People's Party, the Palestinian People's Party, which is actually the Palestinian Communist Party, Bassam Salahi. And I also had two meetings with Naif Khawatme of the Democratic Front for the Liberation, the Palestinian for the Liberation of Palestine. Now, why do I mention that? First of all, I'm proud that I had the chance to meet them, of course, but that's not the issue. Historically speaking, the People's Party, which, as I said, is the Palestinian Communist Party, supported, and still does, supported two-state solution. Historically, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, led by Naif Khawatme, historically has been supporting the one-state solution. Now look what they said to me in the last few years. Bassam Salahi said, we still support the two-state solution, but after that, who knows, upon consent, perhaps we can form a common state, a federation, another kind of arrangement that combines the two communities. So it doesn't rule out the idea of one state. He simply believes, and in my view, justly so, that two-state must be at least a phase. Look what Naif Khawatme told me. He said, we still support a one-state solution, but it cannot be achieved by bypassing a phase of two states. So, those two political movements, which I find myself very, very attached to them, more or less to the same level, I think very similar. So, to conclude, I personally, and my movement, the Communist Party and Hadash, the Jabha, the Front, we have no objection to one state as far as ideology is concerned. We simply think pragmatically that cannot work under the circumstances, and maybe, inshallah, maybe, it's strange to say that as an atheist, but nevertheless, let's agree that at least let's do whatever we can so the Palestinian will be liberated. That's the most important thing now. The Palestinians must be free. They must be free, not today, not tomorrow, but ages ago. And that's our goal now. That's what we have to pursue. Together, Arabs, Jews, others, everybody. That's the goal. And I hope that we succeed, because it's in our soul. It's our future of all of us, by the way, as I mentioned before.
Sorry, Web.
One more question.
Sorry.
I didn't answer one question, sorry.
It's my fault that you haven't answered a question that was it's on this one. Why have the oppressed become?
Really?
Yeah, and it's my fault because
No, you did ask, I forgot.
No, I did, but then I put something.
It's okay.
In fact,
So what was the question? Why the oppressed?
Yes. Why have the oppressed become the oppressors? What are the factors of
that made Israelis embrace fascism?
Look, that must bring me into a kind of social psychological analysis, which I'm very inclined to follow, but I won't, because that would take too much time. But I try to be very brief, really. There is a Marxist sociologist, Perry Anderson, perhaps you heard of him. This is Perry Anderson because it's a sociologist.
both?
Anyway, he wrote, in my view, he wrote a wonderful book 40 years ago, perhaps, in which he raised the question, how come that the so-called quote unquote, the rednecks in the south of the United States collaborated with their exploiters against the blacks instead of cooperating with the blacks against the common exploiters. And he coined the term psychological compensation, which means in one sentence to be without not feel with. That means that they were given by their exploiters out of their own class interests, of course, the impression that they are a common and equal part of the ruling nation. And that allowed them, by mocking them, by the way, by selling them the false conscience of being part of the ruling race of nation, they agreed to suffer their material exploitation and by feeling as if they were part of a bigger thing. I think that's one of the problems not only in Israel. I think it is manipulated everywhere. But look, in Israel, who are the most exploited, abused, and oppressed after the Palestinians? The Oriental Jews, those who came from the Arab and Islamic world, from Iraq, from Iran, from Syria, from North Africa, from Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria. They are still oppressed. By the way, not only on materially, on a class basis, but also culturally, so to speak. We were talking yesterday, Yitzhak, about the brothers Kuwaiti, were Jewish musicians, probably during the 40s, the most important, prominent musicians in Iraq. Immigrated to Israel. It's not that nobody heard about it. Nobody heard about them because they were culturally oppressed. They were mocked. They were treated as inferior. Still, at the same time, if you analyze, for instance, the results of the elections, not only the last ones, for many years, you can see that the majority, of course, not all of them, and not the vast majority, but the majority of Oriental Jews vote for the extreme right. Same right that oppresses them and exploits them, because the right sells them the same Andersonian psychological compensation. We must find the way to break, and I don't say that I have the formula. We must find the formula to break it, to break this knot that allows the most fascist and racist political factors in Israel to manipulate those people against the Palestinians. And perhaps you heard about another sociologist, Yehuda Shenhav. Yehuda Shenhav is a Jew, he is a professor of sociology. He was Sha'arabani, his original name. He was born in Iraq. And he wrote a very famous book called Jewish Arabs. And he analyzes and explains sociologically, it's an academic book, why those who are entitled Oriental Jews from the different places I mentioned, of course, Turkey and Iran are not Arabs, but that's just to rule it out for a second. But here he explains why they should be referred to as Arabs, like they are Christian Arabs and Muslim Arabs, they are Jewish Arabs. So that is something that Zionism, all across the board, all Zionist movement has been trying, still is, to totally eliminate the Arabism, let's say, quote unquote, of those people. And because it's easy that way to incite them, first and foremost, against the Palestinians, and to make them, followers, not to say you know, metaphorically speaking, slaves of the fascists. So that psychological compensation is something that we, as progressive, socialists, etc., should find a way to break. As I said, I still haven't, you know, found the formula.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Of Liberation and Marx Memorial Library, I think we've really got to thank everybody for attending, and also all of you.
Thank you.
I can see the medalers.
And thank you. I don't remember the name.
I'll do the thanking. You can just thank you very much. I think you've worked hard enough. Just calm down now.
Thank you, of course.
No, thank you. No, and thank all of you.
All of you. Indeed.
Please think about joining MML and Liberation. I really do think that we worked very hard and you've been very good. And well, just once more, well, and that's it then. Goodbye.
Thank you.
For coming.
All the best. Now, it's not. It's off.
No.
It's not off, so I cannot.